everybody, welcome back to another episode of Between Sermons, where we get to continue the conversation from Sunday, and we're going to have an amazing time today because if you were part of our church, you saw on Sunday we had a great conversation with our counseling team and how to navigate conflict in marriage and relationships. And so today, my guest is actually the boss of it all. The one and only Quiana Hardy, who actually runs our counseling department here. So you weren't on the stage, but you were down on the floor, giving them side eyes and like telling them cut when they were going a little too far.
But I was coaching from the sidelines.
Yeah, but that's your team
that
was up there. And so we are just super grateful that you have such an amazing team.
They are amazing. They are phenomenal. And honestly, I'm honored to work with them. They teach me more than I probably teach them because they've all been married longer than me. I've only been married 19 years.
Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy. And, you know, couples on my team have been married 57 years.
Yeah.
So I'm like, stop calling me boss. I really honestly feel like I need to be sitting at your feet learning some more.
Yep. That's how I felt trying to interview them and ask them questions. Like, literally, there are people that have been married longer than I've been alive.
Exactly.
I was like, your wedding anniversary is before my birth date. Like, that's wild. But it was some great insight. We got so many questions, so we're just going to jump in because even after, kind of eliminating some duplicate questions, some questions that were really similar, we're still sitting at about 20 questions for you today. So I hope you have your answers ready. You got your Starbucks. You're good to go. No product placements here, but,
I'm trying to cover it with my hand.
It's all right. I already said it out loud. So we'll get some kind of strike. I don't know. But so we're just going to jump in with these questions. Love to get your perspective. So here we go. First one is actually kind of a two-part question. I'm going to give you the first part, and then we'll tackle the second part. Okay. It says, how can you support your spouse in addressing unresolved childhood issues that affect your marriage? That's probably a 2-hour show right there.
Pretty much. So we all bring in baggage, right? We all have childhood issues. We all have maybe experiences that kind of make us who we are. Okay. But some of those issues are more traumatic than others. And some people are in different places and when they are ready to address them. I'm hoping I'm not going to start off this whole thing of communication. But one, talking to your spouse, letting them know that you support them and that you would encourage them to seek individual counseling so that they can address the things that they need to address, the things they might have been avoiding, and support them through that process. Because it's through that process that they're going to find their healing. I know when things like that come up in marriage counseling, we usually refer people to cleansing streams. Okay. As a first step. Like if they're not comfortable with individual counseling, cleansing streams. Like let's start.
And for people that aren't familiar with cleansing stream, it's kind of a deliverance ministry, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yes. Yeah. And I always tell people, it's like cleansing streams is like, in my way of explaining it, it is like cleaning out the gook. So that we can do the work of the Father, right? And so it addresses those things that are happening in your past, the baggages that you brought in, like into your marriage, whether it's issues with mom or dad, issues with rejection or abandonment, and giving you a safe space to work through those things, so that you are better able to function in your marriage. Yeah. Instead of maybe taking out those things on your spouse or your children or other people around you.
Yeah. So no, that makes sense. A lot of times we talk about how, a broken person with a broken person, it doesn't create a whole marriage or a whole person. Like you really need to be whole and healthy individually. And so sometimes that care needs to be individual.
Yes.
But what do you do? So if you're the spouse and you're looking at your husband or you're looking at your wife and you're saying, they need help, but they don't recognize it or they're not willing to put in that kind of work. Like, how can you, what kind of advice do you have for that spouse? It's like, I don't know what to do because they need it, but they're not accepting it.
Yeah. That's actually something that you have to go to God about.
Okay.
I really think that if you're praying about your spouse, praying for them, praying for God to reveal to them what it is that they need to do and making the safe space for them to be okay with tackling that issue. I think that's one of the only things we can do, because we can't change anybody. We can't make them go to counseling. We can encourage them, but we also don't want to nag them either. Right?
That's
because it's never going to work to force somebody into counseling and they're not ready to go to counseling. So when you're able to just pray for them, cover them in prayer, encourage them, and get some work on yourself. Like, talk to a counselor yourself. Like, how can, what are some ways I can support my spouse, based on this situation? Let's just say if it was a sexual trauma, you might want to learn what are those things that I might be doing to trigger them. A lot of people that have sexual traumas in their childhood, it impacts their marriage. It impacts their intimacy with their spouse. And so being able to just kind of learn how to be sensitive and not to take, if they're not interested in being physically intimate with you, not to take it so personal, but to maybe see that this might be something that is stemming from another trauma or another issue in their childhood or in their life, and giving them that space and letting them know that you still love them. And that's really what at the root of everything is, like, how much do you love you and how much do you love me? Right. And because the whole idea of marriage is about serving one another. So it's not about you getting what you want and you getting what you want. It's how can I help you be the best person you are? So,
man, I feel like that right there would solve like 90% of marriage problems. Just right there, saying, I'm not in this for what I'm getting from you.
Exactly.
But I'm here for you.
Exactly.
And what can I pour into you? I love that.
Yeah.
So there was kind of a second part to this question that felt less of like a counseling question and more just a spirituality. So the good thing is you're a Christian and you love Jesus, so you're equally qualified to answer this. But they kind of tacked onto that question: what steps can you take when one partner is growing more spiritually? And so we kind of talked about this a little bit last week with the unequally yoked, that sometimes it's not just an unbeliever with a believer. Sometimes it's two believers that are just not matched up. So what advice do you have for that person?
Okay, so I'm okay.
You choose your words much more carefully than I do.
I'm trying to. Because I think as a Christian, there are different ways of growing. There are some people that are Christian and they go to church twice a year. And then there are some Christians that are there every time the doors open. They're involved in every ministry. And when you have two people like that married, there has to be grace there, right? Especially if you're already married. Now, if you're not married, that's a whole other conversation. But if you're married, you have to extend grace to one another and allow for that person to come to Christ in their own way, in their own timing. Because once again, we cannot force anybody to be a follower of Christ, right? All we have to do is produce the fruits of the Spirit, right? So when we are producing love and joy and peace in our homes and, gentleness and happiness, and we're giving them like this sense of, or faithfulness, and we're giving them this sense of a safe space, it draws them more to Christ. And I can't remember where the scripture is, but there's a scripture that talks about how you can sanctify each other through your walk. And it's like, okay, so how do we do that? Well, it's not by saying you need to come to church with me. You're not coming to church with me. You must not love me. Now, so that is like if there's extreme differences. But I will say that in a regular relationship, like where you pretty much are at the same level spiritually, I think there is like kind of an ebb and flow, right?
For sure.
Where you seem to be more in tune with your word this season. And, so, my husband would say to me sometimes, like, when he's talking to his friends, well, I'm going to ask Quiana, she's more spiritual than I am today. It's like, okay.
I love that.
And so, we kind of go back and forth because there was a time when we first started dating that I was not new to church, but I was new to my faith. And I did look to him a little bit more than I might today,
Yeah.
right? So now I know it's like, well, I know how to go to my word, and I know how to seek out the answers myself, and how to go to God in prayer, and then we can talk about things, and we're kind of more on the same page.
Yeah.
But giving, like I said, once again, grace. I mean, because you're not always 100% every day.
For sure.
Right? I'm pretty perfect, but I'm not perfect every day, right?
I love that.
So I kind of like try to give each other grace, and extend some mercy in your walk, like and don't be so super holy, super religious that you're judging each other.
Right there. That's huge. I think, what's the old saying? You attract more flies with honey than vinegar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, man, the times when I've like come home, it's been a busy day, and I realize like I haven't really done anything spiritual. It's just been work. And I come home and I find my wife sitting there reading her Bible. Like that speaks way more into me of like, oh man, I really need to do that, than if I came home and she's like, did you read your Bible today? Right. So it's like, be the example, and then offer that grace. So I love it. I think that's fantastic. All right. You're going to love this question. Question number 2 is, what is the role of premarital counseling and when is it most beneficial to engage in during a relationship?
So, yes, I love that question, as I have my Entwine book out right here, ready to go.
Oh, lovely.
So Entwined is the ministry that we have for premarital counseling. And we actually recommend people to go through Entwined during the dating process. Mm-hmm. And the reason why is pretty simple. Once you get the ring on the finger and a date on the calendar, that's all you're focused on.
Yep.
You're not focused on the relationship anymore.
Yeah.
But when you're in the dating process, that's when you're willing to do the work. That's when you're willing to have the hard conversations, and your focus is on each other and not on flower arrangements and getting to church and doing the catering and your dance and, taking care of your in-laws to be, and, your girls' trip and your boys' trip or whatever. Your focus is on each other.
Yeah.
And so we always recommend people to come through Entwine during the dating process.
Yeah.
And in that process, going through those 6 courses, it allows you to see the other person in a different light, because what we're trying to do is set this foundation. Mm-hmm. And when we can set that foundation, you can determine at that point if you're ready to take it to the next step. Yeah. And we've actually had couples that have come through. They might have been dating for a year, but they never talked about kids. They never talked about their family drama. Definitely
want to have those conversations before you get married, not after you get married.
Right? They were having a lot of fun together.
Yep.
That's how we call it. They were good hanging out buddies. They were good at what the Evans call. They went skating and bowling, but they really weren't having a deep conversation, right? And we encourage people to quiz each other, ask the hard questions, because if you don't ask the hard questions, I guarantee you whatever you did not ask will come up after you say I do.
Oh yeah, 100% every time.
Absolutely. And then you're going to be calling, asking for
marital counseling.
Or telling me that you want a divorce. And neither one of those is the way to really start a marriage with that mindset. So we always say, when you're seriously dating, and don't rush. I tell some of the girls when they come in, if you're not engaged before you get here, don't assume that after you're done with this course that he's going to automatically propose, because this is not about that. This is not the step before you get the ring necessarily. This is the step before you have the conversation to see if you want the ring,
if this even works.
Yeah.
No, I love that you put it as, for seriously dating, even before getting engaged, because what happens, I think, is some of the red flags that are brought out in the 6 weeks, when you're already engaged, they're more like yellow flags. Sometimes they're even green flags. You're like, oh, it's great, it's fine, because we've already invited family to this thing. I can't pull out now.
Exactly.
So it's not that big of a deal. When you're dating, you recognize it as, okay, this is a deal breaker. Yeah. Like, I'm glad we discovered this beforehand. But I love the fact that premarital counseling, at least for my wife and I, when we went through it, it did give us that foundation of, hey, these are the conversations. This is where we line up. This is where we have differences. This is how we communicate in a way that we can get through those differences. And it really, it wasn't even just so much about knowing, if she was the one or not the one or any of that. It was really, how are we going to navigate marriage together? And it did create a great foundation for us. So highly encourage it.
I think that the way we set it up, one, in a group format, because I think we're more some people are not comfortable in groups, and I know we get a lot of pushback sometimes, like, oh, do it have to be a group? Can we do it individually? But I think we learn from each other. And so there are some questions that you might actually be thinking that you don't necessarily feel comfortable asking, but somebody else might ask.
Oh, yeah. I was that kid in school. I never would ask questions. I would always have questions.
Right.
But I would never raise my hand because I'm an extreme introvert. I'm like, no, don't pay attention to me. And so I would love it in group settings when somebody else would ask a question.
Right.
So,
and that's usually what happens, and then we address things and we give them homework, we want them to do the work. And we always tell people, like, this is not just a box to check, like, oh, I have to do this to get married at the church. Yes, you do. But we also want you to do the work. It's not just about going through the motions, because if you don't do the work, it's like you never came.
Yeah. It was just a waste of time.
Right. We give you a book, refer to it. And it always baffles me when people call a year later and they're like, we're struggling with communication. Well, did you pull out your book? Right? Did you have the
conversation? A whole week on communication. Did you
pay
attention to it?
We talked about it.
Yeah.
Are you doing these steps?
Yeah.
How are you talking to each other? And like, no, we don't know where our books are. I don't know what to do. And those skills kind of went out the window.
Yeah.
So, I think people think it's easier than it is, but
marriage takes work.
It takes
Doesn't
work.
matter how pretty she is or how much you love her. It's still work.
It is work.
Yeah.
It is work.
It's good.
Daily.
All the time. All right. Question number 3. What are the considerations for getting married after 35? So for somebody that, in the Christian world, it feels like everybody gets married at 22. But for somebody that's like, I'm getting ready to make this transition. I've been an adult. I've lived my life kind of thing. And now all of a sudden I'm going to be connected to somebody. What do you need to watch out for in that scenario?
Your ways. You get stuck, right? So I always tell people that have been living their life for a considerable amount of time, that entwined is for them as well.
Okay.
Because you have to unlearn some things.
Yeah.
Right? You've been taking over the whole bed. Now you have to share, right? Now you have to pick a side, right? When you get married. You have been able to handle your own finances, pay your own bills, make your own investments, do your own shopping, arrange the cabinets the way you want.
Eat what you want when
you want. When you want. Stay up as long as you want. You've been able to do you. For 35 plus years. It's going to take even more work for you to share now that part of you, right? Because we've been doing it on our own for so long. So I think entwine is actually really important for those couples to have those conversations. And also the conversation is changing, right? So our younger people are probably talking a little bit about when they talk about finances, they're talking about their first house or getting a puppy or maybe having children in a couple of years. But a lot of times when we have people that are getting married later, they have houses already, or they have careers, they have career paths, they have retirement plans. They have a view of what their future is going to look like. And so their conversation is going to be a lot deeper on those topics. So that's when talking about what do you see in the future? Like what, you could be connected to someone dating, like I found him, he's the one. And he's thinking about moving to El Salvador to study some, animal, in 10 years. And you're like, I had no idea that's what he wanted to do. And I don't ever want to leave Chicago. Right. And, it raises good questions. And then don't even put children in it. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
When you add children into the mix, if you have children, maybe from a previous relationship, previous marriage, how to navigate that with a new person is its own challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the whole concept of the blended family, it is almost like a whole other category of marital counseling and advice. And so we might get into that a little bit later in one of the questions. But I'm going to move on to number 4.
Okay.
Because this one, we'll try and make this one short, even though this one could probably be a full day's conversation. Because it is, how do you improve communication in marriage? But one of the things that they kind of put as kind of a side note in the question was, the tone, the approach, especially when you're addressing conflicts. And so a lot of times, we talked about it a little bit before the show. A lot of times the communication issue is either you're not talking to your spouse or you're just talking at your spouse.
Yeah.
And both are dangerous. And I run into a lot, and maybe this is true for you too, but I run into a lot of people who are just talking at each other, and the voices get raised. The word choice gets a little suspect. It gets heated in those conversations. So how do you improve communication in the marriage? What are some just quick tips that you have for people?
So I would say 2 things we always tell people to do is learn a difference between assertiveness and active listening. Learn what assertiveness is and learn what active listening is. So assertiveness is basically using those I statements, like I feel, I want, I would love, and putting a feeling on that, like letting them know, like this is what this would mean for me if you were to do this. And when you're assertive, not aggressive, assertive, and expressing your needs, your desires, and your wants, it allows for the spouse not to feel attacked.
Yeah.
Right. And when you're actively listening and not listening to respond, you're able to meet that person where they are, not where you think they should be, because we don't communicate the same, right? My style of communication, the way I communicate, the way I retain information is totally different than my husband's. It can cause major conflict if we're not careful, right? So we need to, as a part of a couple, take our feelings out of it. And okay, what are you really saying? If I come over and say, well, I love you too, like, are you really? Do you?
I really felt that.
Right, I felt that, right? I mean, you're all crossed off. You're blocking yourself from me. There's a physical thing that's happening there. And just, paying attention to your tone. I know my husband has challenged me on that several times. Because I can be kind of sarcastic.
Hey, I got that spiritual gift too.
So I can sometimes say things and it's like, I didn't mean for it to come out that way. And as much as I do have a poker face in the counseling office, I don't necessarily carry that home all the time. And so it's like your face is saying something completely different than your words. And so being aware of that and acknowledging it, which is sometimes probably my hardest thing. It's like, well, no, I wasn't, that's not what I meant. And then asking those questions, part of the act of listening. If you don't understand what they're saying, repeat it.
Even if you think you know what they said,
right,
still repeat it. Because I've had so many conversations with my wife where I'm like, no, that's not what I meant by that.
Right.
And so you got to get clarity.
Yes. And be okay with explaining it. The other person has to be okay with explaining it again and not being annoyed. Like, I've already said this, but I'm not quite understanding. I want to understand the heart behind what you're saying. So, when a wife is fussing and complaining about being overwhelmed and having too much to do, what they're really asking for is help. Right. And so what are you really needing from me? So.
Yeah, and that one can be a hard lesson to learn for guys, just because sometimes, when they're ranting about all the things that have been struggles, you just kind of like, man, that sucks. Like, I'm so sorry that you went through that.
Right.
And what you're not hearing is, could you please take the dog out so that I don't have to?
Right. Can you help?
Yeah, exactly. But sometimes it just goes right over our heads. But there's a principle here that I think even applies outside of just marriage relationships that I try and teach our team, that perception is reality. And a lot of times the conflicts that we see outside of relationships, in relationships, is somebody says, well, you said this thing and it hurt me. And the person's defense is, but I didn't mean for it to hurt you. But that's not really a valid excuse, because at the same time, like, perception is reality. So whatever they perceived, if they perceived it as an attack, if they felt it as an attack, then guess what? It was an attack. You may not have wanted to attack them, but you did. And so now you have to own that, and you have to apologize. You have to rephrase things. You have to clarify, I understand how that made you feel. I'm so sorry. There was a better way I could have said that. I didn't intend to make you feel that way. Here's what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
And just having that, man, I think that could solve a lot of inner workspace conflict, but also especially in marriages.
Yeah.
So perception is reality. It's a dangerous thing.
Yes.
All right. How do you address the feeling of being undervalued in a marriage? How do you deal with the incompatible aspects of the marriage? That's kind of a two-parter, I guess. But let's focus on that. How do you address the feeling of being undervalued in a marriage?
And so that's when that assertiveness training comes into play, when you're learning to communicate, right? So you're basically expressing what your needs are. We have an exercise that we do with couples where they have to list out 3 of their wishes. I wish that we could do this.
I like that.
And when they can talk about their wishes and they take turns listening and explaining those wishes back and forth, they're able to actually hear someone. So we might hear couples say, I wish we could spend more time alone together instead of in groups with our friends. I want to connect with you one-on-one. It would make me feel appreciated. It would make me feel like I'm the center of your world, as opposed to being entertained by all these people. And when you're able to express that in a safe place, it hits a little different than, you never want to be with me.
Exactly.
So,
and when you let those things kind of bottle up, they build up, and then all of a sudden it does become that you never want to.
Yes.
If you had just addressed that, in week 1 instead of on week 15, of feeling that way. Yeah.
And that's when those words like never and always, which I call infinite terms, pop in. Like, you never do this, you always do this.
Oh, I hate that.
And it's like,
I hate that so much.
And we all are guilty of doing it 100%. Because we're 100% full of emotion when we're riled up, and we're like, you never hear me when I say this. You never. It's like, no, but is it really never?
Yeah.
And then we get really upset if someone say, but really, is it never?
But that's the problem, because when you use those words, it just gives the other person like an excuse to not take you seriously.
Right.
Like when you're like, man, you never listen to me. It's like, I'm listening to you right now. So that's not true.
Yeah.
And now you're not paying attention to the fact that what they're saying is, hey, yesterday I was going through something and you weren't listening. Yeah. And so it actually, you'll get your point across much better if you don't use. And sometimes we use that always and never language because we want to make it feel as big as it feels for us.
Yeah.
But I think it actually does the opposite.
Yeah.
That when we throw those terms out, then the other person listening is just like, it's not true.
It gives them an
out. I know it's not true.
Right. It's an out.
I never help around the house. I took out the trash yesterday.
Exactly.
So you miss the entire point of the conversation. And
exactly.
So you got to be careful there.
So.
Okay, number 6. This is going to be a heavier one. How do you recognize the signs of abuse in a relationship? Because I think physical abuse is probably easy to spot, but the other stuff, there's abuse that isn't raising a fist. So how do you recognize those signs in a relationship?
So one, yes, there are multiple ways of abuse. There are physical abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, spiritual abuse. I would actually say that if you walk away from a conversation or from an altercation or from an interaction with the person that you're in a relationship with, and you feel under the dirt, chances are, and this is happening to you on a regular basis, chances are you're experiencing some type of abuse. Yeah. There are so many ways, and emotional abuse is the one that I think most people get away with, because it doesn't leave visible scars. So with emotion abuse, that could be manipulation, and that could be, kind of passive aggressive tendencies to do different things, and it hits here, and that whole like adage of sticks and stones will break your bones, but words never hurt you. Those words stick with you forever.
Words hurt.
They hurt. There are things that I heard when I was a child that I still remember like it happened yesterday. Yeah. Right? Now, do they hurt as much as they did then? No. But they still hurt. I can still access that pain if I needed to. And in a relationship, the person that you're committing your life to, the person that's supposed to love you unconditionally, when they say things to you that belittle you, that make you feel less than, that make you feel stupid, that make you feel like dumb or insignificant, when they manipulate you, when they put you down to build themselves up, that's that right there. That's abuse. Yeah. And it needs to be addressed. Yep. And in the Christian world, we see it in spiritual nature too, where they are condescending to you because they feel like they're more spiritual than you. They have a better connection with God than you, which if anybody who has a connection with God knows that if you're going to use the Spirit to attack the person that God entrusted to you, you're not really listening to the Spirit.
100%.
It's like you're abusing God's child. Yeah. And I think that when we see that through that perspective, it could possibly change how we deal with things. Yeah. And then financial abuse is, that one can kind of be a little weird too, where, this is my money. You can't have it. Yeah. But I'll give you a little bit of this, you get like $5 or whatever, or we never have enough money, right? I've heard that a lot of times. We never have enough money. I can't go out with my friends. I can't do anything. I can't get my hair done. Yeah. But I'm always being told I'm ugly, but I can't do anything to improve it. And, those type of things and then he's going out golfing. Yep. He's going out with his friends. Yep. And that is financial abuse. They're abusing you financially or making you feel like you have no way out or no way to get help or to find reprieve because they hold all the purse strings. Yeah.
And I've seen it even where the abuse is, we have no money because of you. Yeah. It's your fault because, you didn't budget for the groceries right. And now, we don't have enough money because of you. Mm-hmm. I've seen that abuse happen a lot, and it's scary. It's heartbreaking. Yeah. That so many forms of abuse really do get kind of swept under the rug. Mm-hmm. You hit on spiritual abuse, and that one as a pastor, like that one probably grieves me more than anything else. Yeah. But when somebody says, well, I know God better, and so he's not happy with what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And, I was praying today, and God told me all these things that you need to fix in your life. And it's like, no, that's not how that works.
Never how it works. No, every time I go to God to pray about his son, he talks about his daughter. Yep. Every single time. Because believe me, I pray about Daniel all the time. I'm like, Lord, you need to fix your child. And he's like, no, I'm going to start with you.
You fix you. He fixes him.
Exactly.
It's all good.
So.
But yeah, it's heavy. And so for anybody that does feel like they're experiencing some kind of abuse at home, what advice do you have for them? Where can they seek help?
So the first thing I always tell people is get safe. Wherever you need to be is safe. Mm-hmm. So if it's physical abuse, of course we have, connections here at different shelters in the area. There's shelter lines that we can put in maybe the show notes if people want to have access to that. But if it's the abuse that they might not be able to see, still get safe, right? And then if you feel like you can't really talk to your spouse, and then get some help for yourself, right? Get some counsel, talk to someone, and at some point, if it gets this bad, this is when we pop in with the idea of a healing separation, which is a term that we actually get from a book from James Dobson called "Love Must Be Tough," and he talks about in the book about how Christians should separate, and when they should separate and how they should separate and the parameters for it. And we pretty much stick pretty close to the vest with that, because we believe that separation is just a tool to use to get to reconciliation, right? It's not, we're not trying to encourage you to get a divorce, because we don't want you to get a divorce. We want you to be healed. And we've seen God heal crazy things, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, he has healed relationships from, multiple adulteries, from physical abuse, from trauma. We've seen people come back, and God has healed marriages, and it's been miraculous. But that process looks different for everybody. And so with a healing separation, that is actually done in the aid of counseling. It is not done on your own. I'm leaving you, right? It is done with counsel. It's done with support, with accountability. And so when we get to that point that we would recommend that for a couple, or a couple is asking us about it, we, want to make sure that they have individual counseling, and that they're also involved in marital counseling, and that work is being done to fix the problems that are coming up in the marriage. And this is not a time of separation that's going to last 2 years. Like, we don't believe it needs to last longer than 6 months. And within that 6 months, you guys, if you're doing the work, you should be able to get to a point where you can get back to a healthier place, but still continuing to do the work. The work doesn't stop. Right? We're going to be working on our marriages until God calls one of us home.
100%.
So.
No, I love that. And I'm so grateful that you even added in that part of you're not doing it alone. So if anybody's listening to the podcast saying, oh, see, that's confirmation, I need to separate from my spouse.
No.
Your first step is to call Quiana. and then we can figure out if that's the right step. But to do that on your own, I think is just, it's inviting disaster.
It is.
Yeah.
Because we're not trying to make you single again.
Right.
No, you're still married. This is not for you to go and get a girlfriend or a boyfriend. And no, this is about you working on you. And then you guys collectively working together on your marriage.
I love it.
So
it's good. All right. How do you approach situations where your spouse is reluctant to apologize after conflicts? So your spouse just doesn't know how to say, I'm sorry.
I think that comes with bringing it to their attention, because they might not know it. They might think that they're apologizing by doing something, right? Like, well, I didn't say I was sorry, but I brought you flowers, or I washed your clothes, or, I did a service, right? Some people don't know how to say I'm sorry, or some people think of it as not as important because I'm going to show you that I'm sorry, right?
I don't have to apologize because we're moving on.
Exactly. And some of that comes from the baggage we have from our family and our background. How did your parents tell each other they're sorry? If you've never heard your parents say they're sorry, chances are you probably don't know how to apologize too much, right? So, being able to have that conversation, like, okay, I see that you're doing all these things, but I really just wanted to hear you tell me that you're sorry. I just really wanted to hear that you regret what happened. And if you're still not getting what you need, counsel's always great. I push counseling a lot because sometimes we just need that third person in the room to echo what you're feeling in your heart, because it's something about in that marriage relationship, we kind of tune each other out after a while, and we need to have somebody else come into the room and say, maybe you should try this. And I know as a spouse, and I'm sure my husband would say the same thing. It's like, I just said that last week.
It is so frustrating. It's like, man, I've been saying that and saying that and saying that. But then my wife hears somebody else say it. She'll see it on TV or something. And she's like, oh, you know what we should do? I'm like,
right. And it's like, oh, okay.
But it's true. It's the same thing for me. Like, sometimes I just need that other voice coming in. I like it. All right, question number 8. How should newlyweds seek and filter marriage advice to avoid being influenced by others from their biases or their past traumas? So I think the way I would clean that question up is when you're a new parent and you're at the grocery store and some random person comes up and tells you how to raise your child, that happens for newlyweds too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like everybody's like, oh, here's what you got to do for a happy marriage. How do you filter, okay, this is good advice, this is bad advice, this is advice I don't want to model their marriage? Like, how do you navigate that as a newlywed?
So this is where the Bible comes into play.
Okay.
I really do
I'm always
believe
happy when the Bible comes into play.
It's like, okay, how does that align with the Word of God?
Yeah.
Are they telling me something that is against what I know is true?
Yeah.
Or are they just giving me their opinion?
Yeah.
And quite honestly, most of the time, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's it. And you don't have to take it. You don't have to respond to it.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. You know, and just keep moving.
That's what I learned to do as a dad. Just to say, oh, thank you. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for that. I didn't ask you, but thank you for that.
No, my kid's going to cry. It's okay. Thank you.
Right. And I think that is probably the healthier way, because a lot of people feel entitled to giving their opinion.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that has to do with social media, because we can give our opinion freely behind a screen and we think everybody wants to hear our opinion.
Yeah.
But we don't. So, and, you know, I think that when you're looking for opinion, look at the source. I think it's healthy for us to have friends. And, you know, I have 2 really great girlfriends, and what I love about them is that they're not just Quiana's friends. They're for my marriage, right? Yeah. So when they give me correction, when they give me advice, they give it to me with the heart of God. And so I can receive it a little bit better. They'll tell me, okay, you're a little out of pocket for that. Yep. You know, I don't think that that's what he meant, you know, and they are champions for us.
Yep.
And
for the marriage, not for you as an individual.
Exactly. Because, you know, I have those friends too. They're going to always be on my side no matter what happens.
And you know which friends are which.
You do.
Which means the tendency is going to be like, when I just want to feel like I'm right, I'm going to go to the people that are going to be like, you know what, you're right.
Exactly. Yeah. But I love that, you know, those 2 women in my life, they love God first.
Yeah. And
they love me. And while they are, like, they will be the ones to bail me out of jail if I need it, right? But they are also those ones that will pray for my marriage and pray for the health of our relationship and pray for my husband and pray for me. They're the ones that I think he feels the safest around because he knows that they're not going to recommend that I do something crazy, right? Or that I leave him. And they're going to always have our heart, you know, their heart is always going to be matched to ours for our marriage. And so figure out the people's intention, right? Yeah. Some people are just jealous. They're petty. They're upset that you're getting married and they're not, you know, they're upset that you have kids and they don't. Yep. And it comes out.
They're in a bad marriage and they're going to project all of their stuff onto you.
Exactly. Or they've been through multiple divorces and they're going to see your marriage through their marriage and through their filter, and they're not going to have the same hope.
Yeah. Oh, I still remember the first time I got marriage advice from somebody that'd never been married before. And I was like, wait a minute, like, well, are you qualified for this? Like, what? Like, I'm all for good advice, but like, I think you need to be married before you can tell somebody else what it's like to be married.
Pretty much. Yeah. Which is, it's hard because, you know, even as like a therapist, like, we're trained to do this, right? Yeah. And we're trained most of the time before we're actually in a relationship. So it's like, I feel like a hypocrite. Like,
it's a weird moment, right?
It is. You know, like, yeah, I'm 24 and I'm going to tell you
how to help you with your marriage.
Let me help you with your marriage of 30 years.
I love it. right, so this is going to be, I'm going to read this question, but we're not going to answer this question.
Okay.
Because the question number 9, I just want to keep the numbering intact. So number 9 was, what are the key principles to staying hopeful for a partner or remaining content in singleness? But I'm not answering that question now because we're going to answer that next week. And so the whole show for next week is all about singleness. So we're going to take care of question number 9 then. So sorry, we're not answering it now. All right, number 10, though. I kind of love this question as a pastor. How do you maintain spiritual peace? I love that just in general, but then they added on, especially before church. And I think that every Christian that's married has experienced that whole like Sunday morning chaos. You know, the kids do something they're not supposed to do. You're driving into the church parking lot, practically cussing each other out. And then you open the doors and it's like, okay, it's church time. Stop it.
I always tell Andrew, don't let the devil use you.
I love it.
And he's acting out before his time to church. I'm like, don't let the devil use you. It's time to go.
He's just trying to drum.
I know.
That's what he's trying to do.
He's like, Mom, I just want to play. But, I think that is one of those things that we actually have to guard against, right? We know Sunday's coming.
Yeah.
Right? And I see that as indication that service is going to be on fire and whatever is going to be talked about is going to impact you spiritually and it's going to help you with growth. Yeah. Right. And so, kind of looking at that as a sign like, oh, church is going to be great today because you getting on all my nerves. Right. And we see this actually, I was talking about it before the show that we see this when we're starting premarital counseling. It's hilarious. Yeah. Like I would get in an argument with my husband the day before premarital counseling.
Yep.
All the time. And it's like, what?
It's amazing how much that happens. So as a preacher, it's like if I'm going to be preaching a finance series, I'm going to have money problems that week. If I'm speaking a relationship series, I'm going to have relational problems that week. If I'm talking about kids, I'm going to have kid problems that week. It's just whatever I'm speaking on, we're going to talk about patience. And man, I'm going to have so many opportunities for patience during the week. It's nuts.
So it's just a sign that God is about to do something amazing. Yeah. And just be on guard for it, right? Yeah. Pray about it beforehand. Don't allow yourself to be baited.
Yeah. Don't take the bait.
Yes. It's like, you know what? Do I really want to argue about this right now? Yeah. Probably not. And use some wisdom. Yeah. That's pretty much all you can do. Yeah. Arguments going to happen. They're going to happen on the way to Sunday service. You might make a crazy turn and your wife is like, oh my God, you're trying to kill us. And it's like, no, I'm not. I just was trying to get to church. Yeah. Just don't take the bait. Yeah.
And the reality is we should be trying to maintain the peace whether you're heading to church or not. So same principles apply on a Tuesday morning, on a Saturday afternoon.
Exactly.
Like, sometimes we feel like, okay, I can't sin right now because I'm about to go to church. Where it's like, you do realize that God is with you everywhere. So maybe you should have that same heart like on Tuesday night.
Pretty much. And I think you should always be praying for peace in your home. Yeah. It is a regular prayer for me, for our home. And it's not just for the peace between my husband and my son and myself, but also for anybody else who comes in. Yeah. Right. Because whenever we have people coming into our space, they're bringing their stuff too. Right. And we know the supernatural and the spiritual is real. So, I pray for peace to be covering our space. Yeah. Because I don't want anybody leaving no chaos. Don't leave it. Take it with you. Yeah. Leave it on the front door. Yeah. But creating a place, a home of peace.
Yeah. I like it. It's good. Yeah. All right. Question number 11 for you. How do you trust your spouse to lead the family, including when they are not a believer or they are introverted? That's a massive question.
That is a massive question.
Trusting your spouse to lead the family, including when they're not a believer. That one becomes...
That's a pastoral question, I think.
You think so?
I think so. What you got?
So what I have, and I think I've said this here recently. So I'm assuming that like they're referring to when Paul talks about the husband is the head of the wife and the head of the family. So in all of that, all those scriptures. So there's like 3 different places where it talks about this. Every single time it was directed at the individual. And what I mean by that is it was as if the Holy Spirit was saying, okay, Quiana, I want you to respect your husband. And then the Holy Spirit was like, okay, and Daniel, I want you to, love and honor your wife. And so what happens is we get in trouble when we try and enforce the other person's job on them. So Daniel's job is never to say, Quiana, you're supposed to love me. Quiana, your job is never to say, Daniel, you're supposed to, lead me. So we take responsibility for our own side of it. Now, in a relationship where both people are taking that, it's fantastic. It's great. It's smooth sailing. It's easy. When one isn't a believer, doesn't necessarily know how to do that or even know that they're supposed to do that, it does make things way more complicated, way more challenging, but it doesn't change the fact that you're just responsible for your part.
Yeah.
So you do the thing that you're supposed to do. You listen to the Holy Spirit. You allow the Holy Spirit to work on that other person. You pray for them. If they're introverted, hey, I'm introverted.
Yeah.
That shouldn't affect how well a person can lead in any way. But the believer unbeliever thing, that's why we caution people, like, don't marry somebody that's not a believer.
Right.
And then if you didn't follow that advice, or maybe you're both unbelievers when you got married, but now you've come to faith, it definitely, I think, is one of those where focus on the part that Scripture tells you to be responsible for, and allow the Holy Spirit to cover the other.
I think that's good. And I think that it's okay to honor your spouse, right?
Believer or unbeliever, you should be honoring them.
Right. And so, and honoring them is just by respecting them. In whatever capacity that they're leading in. They could be great providers, great fathers, great husbands, but not have a relationship with God. And attacking them or belittling them is never going to lead them to God.
So that honey vinegar thing that we talked about
that whole
before.
Thing.
and if you're a wife whose husband is not leading in a spiritual way, then there are things that you can do kind of on the side. You bring your kids to church, get them plugged into a youth ministry where there's going to be male leadership that's going to, show them what it means to be a man that loves God. There's things that you can do. I know a lady that had adopted 2 kids. She had no husband, just her and the 2 kids. So she got them involved in all kinds of church activities where they would have a good, positive Christian male influence on their life. And so, like, there's things that you can do to assist in this, but I think ultimately you focus on the part you're supposed to do.
Right. And then allow that fruit to
Yeah.
produce something.
Love it.
So,
all right. This is number 12. How can one spouse support and empower the other in areas such as leadership in marriage, ministry, calling, or personal development? So we've kind of touched on this in a few other questions, but how can you support your spouse? Your husband, he's got different ministry calling than you do. He's got different passions than you. How do you support him in those things?
One, it's a little different because, for the people probably don't know this, but my husband and I have not actually attended church together in a long time. Probably a good portion of our marriage, because my husband's a church musician and he plays at other churches. And so my son and I come here, and then he comes when he can. And the way that is actually like not necessarily allowing, I hate that word. I'm not allowing him to do anything. That is how God gifted him. He's a phenomenal musician, and his calling has made more room for him than he was a musician when I married him. So the best way for me to support him is to allow him to do what God called him to do. I don't stand in the way of him doing what God called him to do. When I'm available, I support. It's a little harder with a child. Before we had children, I would run around with them for certain things and be present. And he does the same thing for me, right? So there's, as a counselor, of course, he can't come to my sessions with me, but he has come to Entwined a couple of times and sat in with the men talking to future husbands, right? He's sat in with them. He has attended events with my team, or he is very much present. in certain activities that we do as a team. And so he does support that. Even today, we've had some difficulties this morning with some family stuff, and his thing was go do what you need to do. Like, I'm going to be here and we'll deal with what we need to deal with when you get home. But he's like, you made a commitment to the church, so go do what you have to do. Yeah. And that's his way of supporting me. Yeah. And so it's really just kind of making room for them to do what they're supposed to do, and not to hinder them, not to make them feel guilty. Yep. But I will say this. This is something I heard from a pastor years ago. I'm not going to say his name, but because I don't know. Some people have their own feelings, but
dun, dun, dun.
I know, right?
Now we all want to know who it is.
It was actually in a sermon and at our previous church, and we had a speaker, and he talked about the fact that he was divorced, and he explained that he's divorced because he put his ministry before his marriage. Yeah. Right? Your calling can't come before your first ministry. Yep. Right? Amen. So if you prioritize, it's God and then my spouse, and then my calling. Yeah. If you're spending every day and night at church or doing the work, and your spouse hasn't seen you and haven't felt your touch or haven't had a meal with you, then you are completely out of alignment with God. And God does not want that, because your first ministry is to them. Yeah. And so prioritizing that is really important.
Yeah, the way I've it's going to sound funny when I talk with young pastors, and I feel like I'm still supposed to be in that category, but I guess I'm not anymore. But when I talk with younger pastors, like one of the big things that I push on them is the Bible says that Christ will build the church. Mm-hmm. He doesn't say you're going to build the church, but he does say you're going to build your family. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't say he's going to build the family. So if there's one thing that needs to be built by you, it's your family. Yeah. And if you have to let some ministry stuff go, Jesus is going to handle that. He's going to take care of it. It's going to be okay. Yeah. But if you neglect your family, it's not going to be okay. Yeah. Jesus isn't becoming the husband and the father in that family. He's expecting you to do those things. And so you just got to be careful with that. Yeah, the only thing I would add is I've learned to be the biggest cheerleader for my wife. Mm-hmm. Whatever it is that she's trying to do or wanting to do, I'm her cheerleader. I'm there to cheer her on, to tell her she's got this. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be awesome. Wednesday night she's teaching at our CLC women, and so I'm taking the kids. Jaden has his high school introduction.
So crazy.
I told you I'm not a young pastor anymore. God. I'm an old man. I have a child in high school. But so like I'm taking on like parental duties that normally she does because she's got ministry things, and so that's how I support her in that. But yeah, I think it's good. All right, number 13, to what extent should personal and friends matters be shared between spouses, and how does one maintain boundaries with friends of the same sex? I feel like that's two very different questions. So one is like, should there be things that you don't share with your spouse?
This is controversial, but yes.
Okay.
If I'm sharing, if I'm talking to a friend of mine, and they're talking to me about their personal issues or their situation, it's not my job to share that with my spouse. Yeah. Because it doesn't necessarily impact us or me. Right. It's just me being a friend. Yeah. And vice versa. Like if he has a friend that's going through something or he's talking to them, I'm not expecting for him to get out the phone and download all that to me. Yep. Quite honestly, I don't need to know that. Yeah. Right. And so understanding the boundaries, that are in place for your friendship and your relationship. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're keeping secrets either, but you're keeping confidences. Yeah. And that's a little different. Yeah. And so that is what I would say. Like,
yeah. I'm on board with you, and I get the controversy of it. And I think that there is a dangerous side of that, because some people can mask bad behavior behind, well, I'm just keeping confidence. Right. But then when you add the same sex or opposite sex, or, then it becomes a little bit more,
Right.
conflict inducing or shady, I guess is the best way to put it.
Right.
But yeah, there's been times when, I'm talking with a friend that's going through something, and afterwards my wife will just see like that looked like a rough conversation, and I'll just say, yeah, just be praying for them. They're going through some stuff.
Yeah.
And that's as far as the conversation goes, and she understands that. Now, there's also other conversations where I've been talking with somebody and they're like, don't tell Soul. And I'm like, I'm totally telling Soul.
Right.
Now. Like 100%, like this is happening. And so I'll just be upfront with it. Be like,
right.
Yeah,
that's usually
when we finish this conversation, I'm going to go tell my wife, so that she can be praying for you. And,
right.
Also so that she keeps me accountable. Like
exactly.
So yeah, I think the caveat there is like, we don't keep secrets.
Yes.
But I do think that there are times when she doesn't have to have all of the information in order for it to not be keeping a secret, I guess is the best way to put it.
And I think that that's appropriate even with family, there are some things that, I'm an older sister, right? I have 3 brothers. If they are sharing something with them that's going on with their relationships or their life, I don't necessarily go and run and tell my husband everything. Because if they wanted him to know, they have his number and they will share it. But I'm their sister. So there's a certain confidence that I share with them. And I respect that boundary. And I do that with the whole family, right? And then I advise them, like, I think this is something you probably need to talk to mom about. This is something you probably need to talk to dad about. This is something you might want to get your brother-in-law's opinion on because, he could actually help you with this and kind of guide them in whatever way they need to. But it's not my job to do that.
Yeah, so. I think the I don't know, the thing to keep in mind is if it feels like it's gossip, then it's probably not the right thing to be doing.
Exactly.
It's still gossip if it's between you and your spouse. Like,
right.
The two of you can be gossiping.
Pray for so-and-so because her husband did something.
You will never believe what I learned today.
Exactly.
Right. As my wife puts it, the tea.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
we're not doing that.
Caution there. All right, number 14, what are effective ways to seek marriage advice and connect with couples who can provide guidance? You want to just give people the email address for counseling at coc.tv? That's how you can effectively seek marriage advice.
Exactly. I think that is, the Bible does tell us that there is safety in a multitude of counsels. Yeah. So, seek out counseling. I'm going to be like Mel and Tim on Sunday. I'm going to push life groups.
Please. If you didn't, I would have.
You need that accountability. Yeah. You need to have other people. And not necessarily just for advice, but for role models as well. My husband and I were part of a life group here before our life took a different turn. And it was helpful for us. We were in one for 3 years and the same group, and those people are still a part of our life. Yeah. They're still a part of our community, right? The Crons were a part of our life group. Awesome. And so when they were talking about it, even on Sunday, Don and I were like, that's how we met, because, that is how our relationship started. And so I think that you have those options that are there to get as much spiritual guidance and advice. With appropriate boundaries.
Cool.
Right. Which I think is actually part B of the other question was about boundaries.
Yeah.
But I think there's another question that we could probably answer later about boundaries because boundaries are so important.
Yeah. Well, we've got 6 more questions on here. We're going to do our best. I think we've already been going for an hour, which is usually our cutoff point. But if you're at game, I'm game. 6 more questions. Come on, let's do it. We're going to win today. We failed last week. Last week we had like 25. We got through 15. It was really bad.
I'm here for the win.
Yeah. Come on. Make it happen. All right, question number 15. How can couples make time for each other when overwhelmed with work and parenting responsibilities?
Just do it.
Do it. How do you make time? Make time.
You have to do it. Yeah. You have to block a day off the calendar. And you have to prioritize it. Yeah. It has to be a priority. And it doesn't I think we talked about this and I've heard you guys talk about it in the last couple of weeks. It doesn't have to be something spectacular. Yeah. Right. You don't have to go out for a 5-star meal, with, all the stuff. Yeah. It can just be for a walk. Yeah. It can just be sitting on a couch watching a movie,
Yep.
or laughing, or just sitting around talking, or something like that. The idea is just to do it, to make that time. Sometimes it could be just sitting out on the porch, you know. I know when our son was younger, we would go to Chick-fil-A on Monday nights. He would play in the play area, and we would sit there talking to each other, you know, eating.
That's a great date.
I know.
We do that all the time.
Chick-fil-A is amazing. So we used to do that, and that worked. And, you know, now our son is a little bit more like, because he's the only child, he's a little bit more like, I need all your attention.
Both of you focus on me right now.
Right, exactly. So, you know, we'll, you know, maybe have a movie night or sit down and talk on the couch and just kind of, you know, have some FaceTime. Which I think Nisha and Wes mentioned yesterday, just having some face-to-face time just to talk. Sometimes, like, you know, even last night when we were, you know, chatting about life, and, you know, he was like, let's put him to bed, and then we could talk. It's like, okay. You know, we walk around the block, you know, he walks ahead of us and he's playing, and we walk and we talk, and that's good stuff. And usually that's the better stuff, because we're not stressed about the money we're spending, how far away from home, getting a babysitter.
That's my thing. Like, there's been times when, like, we're trying to do something really fancy or really nice, and all I'm thinking about is how much money we're spending. Yes. I'm the saver. I'm the, like, okay, I want to make sure that so it's almost more stressful for me. Like, I got friends that are like, we're going on vacation to Aruba, and we're doing this, and we're doing that. I'm like, how much money are you spending for your date? Like, I'm just taking my wife to Chick-fil-A. Like, let's go. Come on, babe. This is going to be great.
See?
But I think it is just a matter of, you got to make time. You have to put in the work to do that. And that means pulling out your calendar, coming up with a day. And for some people, there's a set day, a set time every week. Yeah. For others, like Sol and I, our schedule, it's so flexible. Like, no week is the same as the week before. And so we can't ever say, well, every Friday night is going to be date night. Like, it just doesn't work in our ministry lives. But we get, you know, Thursday afternoon lunch together, and we get, you know, Friday morning hangouts. And
it doesn't have to be at night.
Exactly. That's been the big thing for us.
Yeah. I mean, like, I know when our son was in school, when he was attending school, we would sometimes, my husband would be off of school because
that's called free childcare.
Yes. Yeah. And he, you know, because he worked for a school district as well, and sometimes the calendars didn't align. And so he was off a day, and Andrew had to go to school, and we would go to breakfast together. Yeah. You know,
that's awesome.
That was a great date. You know, we would take our time, and we might go to the mall and walk around and, you know, do things like that. And you take those moments when they come, and don't stress out if it's not every week. Yeah. Right. Just be intentional about when it is. Yeah.
And you'll feel when you've gone too long.
Yeah.
And you're like, we need some time together. Yes. And if one of the spouses says we need time together, the job of the other spouse is to say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Even if you're not feeling it.
Right.
But if they're feeling it, like there was a moment where I felt like Sol and I, we spent every waking moment together. And then I went to the office for something, and she texted me like an hour later. She's like, I miss you. I'm like, you cannot possibly miss me. Like, we have literally just spent every waking moment together for like 3 weeks straight.
Right.
But I said, miss you too.
Yeah.
Like, it's just one of those where it's like, okay, like she needs that connection. And so,
that's how it was during COVID. It was like, you know, my husband would be doing classes in the basement, and I would be doing with my son at his classes upstairs. And I think one of the gifts I got him was this little Bond app or whatever. Okay. And if you tap it, it tells the other person that you love them. And so he would be in a basement. He's like, what does all this mean?
You're just tapping like crazy.
I'm just like tapping. He's like, what does it mean? I'm like, I don't know.
That's awesome.
But you know, you got to find fun ways to connect.
Yeah. You have to do it. There's no secret formula. There's no magic recipe for it. It's just do it. It's like spending time with God. Yes. Like, you're always going to be too busy to read your Bible. It's just always going to be the thing. But if you want a healthy walk with God, you need to make time to read your Bible. Oh. You need to make time to pray. If you want a healthy marriage, you got to make time to be together.
Yes. And be okay with learning something new. Yeah. I know my former pastor and his wife, she said that she picked up golfing because he was golfing. And she's like, and anything's going to take my husband away from me for hours at a time, I need to be a part of it. And so she started golfing, and she's actually...
Can you tell my wife to learn how to play video games? Because that would be the magic
I am really bad at playing video games. So Andrew gets so frustrated with me, and so does Daniel. They're like, you're supposed to jump over that. I'm like, for real?
Yeah.
So, but we do it. We try, you know, but if it's something that's going to occupy their time, that means it's important to them. Yeah. So it should be important.
And it doesn't mean you have to do it with them every time they do it.
Yes.
Because there's probably some times where they're like, I actually just needed some space. I needed some golf time without you.
Exactly.
But when you do have a connection, those interests, I think it's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, question number 16. How do you navigate differences in family planning and parenting styles and agree on the number of children to have? So... can I jump in and just say, how do you navigate those differences in premarital counseling?
Yes.
Those are differences you don't navigate after you get married. Those are differences you navigate before you get married.
Yes.
But for the person listening that says, oops, here we are, we're married. How do you navigate those kind of differences?
You need to have a conversation, a really serious conversation about the realistic expectations that you have for your relationship. I think a lot of times, in our marriages and our relationships, we have the expectations that we don't share, and we hold somebody accountable for the expectations that they're not even aware that are there, right? So having those conversations, being intentional about those conversations about what your wants are and your desires are pivotal. Like there's no way around it. You know, we had the conversation about kids before, and my husband was kind of indifferent. Like, if we have kids, great. If we don't, I'm okay. And I was like, but I still want to be a mom, and I want to have a kid. And he's like, okay, then we have a kid. Yeah. You know, it was a conversation.
That's an easy compromise.
It was an easy compromise, right? But he was very clear. I don't want to have 5 kids. I was like, okay, I'll compromise. Can we have like 3? And, you know, and God saw that we only had 1, and that's okay. But, you know, that was an ongoing conversation. You know, we were 9 years into our marriage before we had kids. And so, you know, those are regular conversations that we were having on a regular basis, because it can change. You know, if you get into a career that takes you in a different trajectory, you know, kids might not be on your radar at this moment anymore. And that's a conversation you need to have with your spouse. You know, that's a real life conversation. Because now all of a sudden your expectations, your desires are changing. And it's not fair for them to just assume that everything's still the same. So
you definitely have to revisit those conversations.
Definitely.
So like Sol and I wanted 3 kids since I was like 12 years old. I'm a weird guy. Like, I was thinking about kids at 12. But I wanted 2 boys and then a girl, and I always said in that order. God loves me.
Clearly.
Because that's what we have. We have 2 boys and then a girl in that order. But that's what I wanted since I was 12.
Right.
And when Sol and I first started, we had this conversation before we got married, because we did things the good way. And so, you know, I'd asked her, you know, how many kids do you want? She said she wants 2. She's like, I want a boy and a girl. And I was like, ooh, this is rough. And so, like, I had to do, like, the hard work of saying, okay, is this an area that I can compromise in?
Yeah.
If I end up having a boy and a girl, instead of my 3 kids, like I've been planning since I was 12, am I okay with that?
Yeah.
And I came to the conclusion that I was. And I was like, if this is what she wants, I'm not going to allow, you know, a childhood dream of 2 boys and a girl ruin that.
Right.
And then we had the conversation about it, and she said, look, if we end up with 2 boys, I would have the 3rd child to try and have a girl. She's like, now, if we have 3 boys, it's over. It's done. She's like, I'm not going to 4 kids. I'll go from 2 to 3, maybe. And so that was our arrangement. And so I still remember we're at the doctor's office, and we find out the sex of my middle child, Bennett, is a boy. And it was like the weight of the world just lifted off my shoulders. I was so excited. But I looked at her, and she was happy.
Yeah.
And so it was one of those. And now we look back, and she's like, I can't imagine not having one of my 3 kids. And she's on team 3 kids. But we had the conversation.
Yes.
And both of us were willing to compromise for the other.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the lesson that I want people to learn is, can you compromise on these things? Because if you can't compromise on them, then you shouldn't have gotten married.
Yes.
And so hopefully you discover that before the marriage and not after the marriage, because then it's just going to create some conflict.
Absolutely. You definitely need to have the kid talk. First.
Yeah. What about like parenting styles? So I know that like, so for Sol and I, we have very similar parenting styles.
Mm-hmm.
Our approach to everything has been, neither of us wanted to do homeschooling. Neither of us wanted to do private school. It was public school all the way. And, we both have, we're not opposed to spankings when the kids were young enough to need them. Now I feel like if I try and spank my, high school child, that just feels very inappropriate.
He's the same height as you.
Yeah, he's literally my size. So like, is that just a fight at that point? Like, is that a spanking anymore?
Exactly.
Like, I think I just fought my child.
Right. That's domestic violence.
yeah, exactly. And so we were lined up in a lot of things, but we did have to navigate. I'm a little bit more heavy-handed, a little bit more, harsh or direct. So like when my kids are doing something wrong, my voice will raise. I'll cut it down immediately. And I'm like, we do not behave that way. Like, here's our standard. Like, where she'll kind of like, oh, hey, maybe we shouldn't do it that way right now. Or, hey, could you guys lower the volume a little bit? And I'm like, everybody quiet. And so we do have different approaches in that.
Yeah.
How do you, I don't know, what's your advice? How do you navigate that if two parents are not seeing eye to eye on how to raise?
Well, one, the first thing you need to establish as a parent is that you guys are a team, right? Because you're if you're not, a kid naturally knows how to split their parents, right?
Yeah.
They know. They come out.
I knew. Ask Dad. Don't ask Mom.
Oh my gosh. Every single time.
Pastor Jerry, go. Dad's the pushover. He's the easy one. The problem is he learned early on how to say, "Did you ask your mother?"
Right.
And I was like, man.
See, and that's just it. You have to be a united front. And so even if there are differences in how you're parenting, if you guys can connect alone and have those conversations and not to expose those differences to the children, you might be able to make it, right? Because kids they know naturally who they can get what they want from. I think it was your dad who actually said in the sermon that kids come out lying, right? They come out sinners, right? We've been lying since we came out, right?
Crying because you're hungry? Nope. You just say you're crying because you got a dirty diaper? Nope. Your diaper's clean. You're crying for no reason.
Exactly. I'm crying because I need you to come see me. That's it. So they already know that. But it's really important as a couple to understand that it's important for you to be on the same page. Naturally, I think there is a more disciplinarian person, that
was the word I was looking for. I'm the disciplinarian.
Yes. And then there's usually like the kind of pushover maybe parent.
Oh yeah, that's 100%.
Yes.
I'll literally, she'll send me a text message while I'm at work saying, hey, Bennett is mouthing off. He's being whatever, because it's usually Bennett. It's always the middle child. Sorry, middle child
They
people.
need attention.
But so he's doing something. So it's like, when you come home, you need to deal with it. So I'll come home and I'll deal with it. And then she's like, oh, don't be so mean. And I'm like, I only did this for you. Like, I wasn't even a part of this. I did this for you.
I didn't even know this was happening. Right? So I am the opposite. I'm on team. I'm going to handle it. And when your dad gets home, he's going to handle it too. Because we are on the same team.
We're both going to handle this.
We're going to both handle this. And, that's kind of how we work. There are sometimes I actually think that my husband is probably a little more of a pushover because he doesn't want to make him cry. And he's
a musician. He's got that softer side.
I guess, sometimes when he gets on him, it is clear, right? That dad is not happy with what's happening. I spend more time with our son because we do homeschool, and that was a whole conversation. That was a whole conversation because that was never in my plan. But that's kind of how we navigated that. We kind of are having the conversation as we go. I don't think we had this conversation beforehand. I don't think we knew how we were going to be as a parent beforehand until you have a child. I don't think you clearly know.
No, definitely not. Sol and I had some conversations. Like we had like the spanking or no spanking kind of conversation. We had the school question conversation before we had kids. But then, now all of a sudden you have a child and it's okay. What are you doing? What are we
Right.
doing? Yeah, you're definitely figuring it out as you
But
go.
that communication piece is so pivotal in every single area, right? I mean, because our plan, I was never planning on being a stay-at-home mom. I was never planning on being a homeschool mom. I was always planning on finishing my career and, going into practice and doing things a different way. But God had different plans. Our son was a preemie. And so we had those conversations early on, like, okay, what does this look like? Can we survive as on a one income family? We went out to dinner and had a conversation while our son was in the NICU trying to figure out what our next steps were. And then we would check in. Okay, well, he's in, he's getting to that age, preschool is next. What are we going to look like? What is this going to happen? Are we going to go to public school? Our child has special needs. How are we going to meet those needs? And
I love that you guys revisit that conversation at different milestones.
Yes. And we needed to, having those conversations going from preschool to kindergarten. I was very clear. I want to make sure that if he's in kindergarten, that he's in the same school with the same friends, because I don't want him to have to reintroduce his disability to every single new kid that comes around. Right. So I was very intentional on that, and he supported whatever I was choosing. And when we decided to homeschool, it was a funny conversation. We were both at an IEP meeting, and he left to go pick him up, and he came back, and I was in tears, and he's like, so what about homeschooling again? And I was like, we're so homeschooling. I am done with the school system. And he was just like, okay. And it was a no-brainer. But it was revisited over and over again because things were changing.
Yeah.
So
I love it. All right. It's kind of a big question, but what contributes? I can't even speak. What contributes? That's the word I was looking for. It's literally written on the iPad. What contributes to a long-lasting marriage, and how do you define and maintain a healthy sexual relationship? So somebody just had to squeeze that sex question in.
I know we like to talk about sex, don't
but
we?
What are the just bullet point it for me? What contributes to long-lasting marriage?
Healthy communication. And
let me guess. Healthy
communication. Next question.
Yeah. No, I think it's brilliant. We kept apologizing for it last week because we're like, you got to talk. But, I really am convinced that every marriage problem, every reason for divorce that's quoted, it's a symptom, not the problem.
Yeah.
The problem is communication. If you cannot talk things through in a healthy and constructive way, then you fight, you break up, you have all these issues with sex, with money, with parenting, with all of it. Like, all of it is solved when you can learn how to sit across from somebody and have a conversation with them that doesn't turn into finger pointing and cussing them out and yelling at them. And it's just open and honest communication to try and solve the problem. Yeah. To work on each other.
Right. And it's also important to remember that you're a team.
Yes.
I'm not at war with you. Yeah. It's not a war. Yeah. We're a teammate. Yeah.
We're not fighting with each other. We're fighting for our marriage.
We are the Holmes and Kelsey combo in this Super Bowl. We have to work together. Yeah. Right? And that's the only way it's going to work. I just had to. Yeah. Go Chiefs.
Yeah, I was rooting for the Chiefs too. There's a guy from the high school I graduated from that plays for the Chiefs.
So awesome!
I have no connection to the Chiefs other than that. I don't really care about the Chiefs, but hey,
I only watch football once a year, and that's the Super Bowl. And I had a fan.
Frankfurt, and he's playing in the Super Bowl. I'm going to root for him.
Awesome.
Why not? Okay, the sex question though. How do you define and maintain a healthy sexual relationship?
So we said it yesterday a few times that sex actually stems from someplace. Mm-hmm. You just
doesn't start in the bedroom.
Yeah. And I think there are tons of books, tons of videos you can find where they talk about how men are like a microwave, but women are like a slow cooker or whatever. Yeah, whatever.
What was Joe McGee's? It was like the pump well.
Yeah.
It got very descriptive. I was like, okay. All right, Joe McGee. You got to prime that pump. Like, okay, yes, sir.
You do. And so it starts with good communication. It starts with seeing your partner as your friend, as that person you want to spend time with. It starts with knowing love languages and showing and expressing love in that way.
Yeah.
I tell my husband all the time, when you wash the dishes, it's the sexiest thing in the world to me. Like, seriously. And I make him blush and everything. I'll be on the phone like, oh my God, I think I did it like a week ago. I was on the phone with my brother. I'm like, oh, Daniel's washing dishes. I gotta go. He's like, what?
I love it.
You know, it's funny, but it's also true.
Yeah.
And it starts with, you know, those conversations throughout the day, you know, if you can, or text messages, or, you know, I always love like watching my aunt and my uncles growing up. They would like, you know, walk past and they would pat them on the butt. And I'm like, oh my God, I want to be that. Right. And so it really is about investing in the other person throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the lifetime of the marriage. And
it takes work,
but
it's worth the effort.
It is. And I know that the question came up yesterday, and it has come up a few times about the issues that could come up physically, medically, and a relationship that could deter intimate, you know, that whole sexual part. But I would actually tell people that things happen, right? We can get accidents, we could, you know, be paralyzed, we could have a medical condition. There are all these things that could possibly happen that could impact your ability to physically connect. But there's still work that you can do in that area, whether it's holding hands or kissing or hugging or touching, anything that helps connect you. And that is important. Just because that one part of you might not be working as well as you wanted to, or that drive is not there, because, you know, God created us in such a unique way that our drive is up and yours is down, and yours is up and ours is down, which I believe is a way for us to serve one another. That's my own personal opinion.
I like that. I like that take on it.
I think that's really, it's like if our focus is on the other person, it doesn't matter, right? And so it's just, I feel like that's why he does it. But finding other ways to connect, because the intimacy is more than just a physical act. It's about connecting with me here, right? And so I can connect. If you can connect with me here, I feel closer to you now than if we had sex 50 times a day, right? And so it's not about the number, it's about the quality, it's about the connection. So
because ultimately it's not about sex, it's about intimacy. And if you can achieve intimacy, that's the goal, that's the purpose. Cool. I like it. All right, we're down to the last 3. Come on, home stretch. How should Christian singles approach dating, and what principles should guide dating for marriage? I know we're going to cover singles and all that next week, but I especially from like a entwined kind of perspective, like you know, what principles should guide dating for marriage? Somebody that's approaching dating as, this isn't just me trying to hang out and have fun and not be alone. This is, I do want to be married and I want to find the right spouse. So how do I approach dating with marriage as the end goal?
So it starts with prayer. We need to be praying about our future spouse, praying about who that person is, pray about the characteristics that you're looking for, making that clear. That can start as young as
12 years old.
Exactly. You know, it could start, you know I'm praying now for my future daughter-in-law, right? We should be praying for our children's future spouses now.
Absolutely.
And pray for them to be revealed to them in the appropriate timing. And so I believe that prayer is essential. But then the next thing is, stop playing around. Just tell them, listen, I'm not in it for, you know, just a Netflix and chill night, right? This is not, I'm looking for my spouse, the person that's going to be with me for a lifetime. This is not something I'm just playing around with. So if you're here to play,
moving on,
then I need to move on, because you know, and it's something my dad actually said when I was younger. He said, if you can't imagine yourself on a rocking chair with gray hair, looking at the grandkids running in the field with somebody, they're not worth your time.
It's good.
And so I used that as a principle. It was like, if I can't have a conversation with you and feel comfortable having a second one, then you're not worth my time. I'm not giving you any more of my time. you know, and being okay with that.
Yep.
Being okay with being single and continue to do your work, continue to work on you. So,
and I think that's the one that I really wish more people would get deeply. That whole it's better for you to be alone than for you to be with the wrong person.
Absolutely.
And my heart grieves when people are, man, they go into something with all of the red flags, and they know all the red flags are there, but they choose to ignore them because I'd rather have red flags than no flags.
Yeah.
And it breaks my heart because it's tough.
It breaks mine too, because you can sometimes see it.
Yeah.
You know?
And I get the pain that somebody has that causes them to say, look, I know he doesn't treat me right, but he treats me. Like, and I would rather be with somebody that's treating me wrong than just be by myself. And the amount of pain that somebody has to be experiencing in their life to come to that conclusion, that breaks my heart. But it's like, I want the Holy Spirit to do a work, or somebody to just get it, that it is better for you to be alone than for you to be with the wrong person.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
That's a heavy one. All right. What is this? Question 19. We are right there. I almost wanted to skip this question though, because I'm pretty sure my wife texted in. But how do you address a lack of attention during couples time, such as excessive phone use during date nights? And I don't know that Soul texted that one or put that one in there, but it sounds like something she would say.
So this goes back to your assertiveness, right? This is part of how you communicate with your spouse. I know I can sometimes be guilty. I like to play games while I watch TV, and it annoys my husband, even though he's not watching a TV show with me. And I'm like, why does it bother you? Yep. I'm fine. I can do two things at once.
I'm listening to the show. I don't have to watch the show.
I look up, I see it. But because, like, if it's something that he wants me to watch, you know, like right now he's into Kitchen Nightmares. So he was watching an episode of Kitchen Nightmares yesterday, and I very casually just put my phone down, right? Because I know it's going to annoy him. If I'm sitting there playing, you know, makeover game on my phone and swiping all over the place, or doing my Duolingo, because I've been doing that very good. But
what language are you learning?
Spanish.
Nice.
Yeah, but I'm really bad at it. I need to probably do more conversational.
Well, we have some people that you could practice with.
Just one or two. No. But I'm really good at reading, but not speaking.
Okay.
But you have to be, like, there's that word again, intentional, right? If I know that it annoys my spouse, I'll do that. Sometimes when my husband wants to talk to me, or if I want to talk to him, I'll mute the TV. Yeah. Right? Or sometimes say, hey, can we turn it off? Because I just really need your attention when I'm talking to you about this. Especially scheduling, because you'll be like, what is happening?
Well, I know it's getting serious when my wife pauses the show and then turns to me. He's like, oh, we're having a conversation right now.
Right.
I thought we were just hanging out. But okay, this is different.
All your attention at this moment. So, you know, being aware of that. And then also finding the right time, you know, if, you know, similar to something that they said yesterday, I had to learn that bombarding Daniel with all my day when we're first getting home is just never going to work. Right. So he needs the moment. And sometimes I have to tell Andrew that, because as soon as he hears that key in the door, he is at the front door with the basketball or with the tablet or with his game. And he's like, I'm ready to play. And it's like, no, let daddy come in. Let him take off his coat at least. Right. And so just kind of giving them that space and recognizing when they need that time. Right. This might not be the time to have this conversation or to talk or, you know, things like that. So just being aware.
And this one is my issue. So like, I recognize it. I do need to put my phone down and aside. And so sometimes for me, it's just, I get so caught up in the work or the thing that I don't realize that I'm doing it. But when I do make the realization, like, okay, I need to do something about this. But a lot of times it really does just help for my wife to just say, hey, you're on your phone.
Right.
And it's like, oh, sorry. Yeah. Like, because it's not intentional. It's just, it's absent-minded. Right. But then the thing that she's working on is there are times when I'm already doing something on my phone and then she comes in and gets mad at me for being on my phone because she's trying to have a conversation. It's like, okay, well, I was halfway through an email that I'm sending out. Can I finish this? and then we have the conversation instead of just yelling at me for doing something I was doing before you came in.
Right.
So
Daniel does that to me.
We're working on it.
I'll be in the room. I'll be watching TV on the computer, and I'm just playing and having my own time. And they'll come in with a whole conversation. I just pause it. I'm like,
Yeah.
uh-huh.
Oh, okay. Okay. What I was doing isn't important.
I know. He's like, oh, wait, you're watching. Oh, go back to watching your movie. I was like, okay, thank you. He's like, wait a minute, you're really going to watch it? I'm like, yes, it's a good part.
You interrupted. We'll talk after.
Right.
No, I think it is an area of weakness for me. So it's a vulnerable space that I gotta work on.
It's okay to put it down though. And you have to for good communication.
Yeah.
So especially if it's important.
Yeah. And it's funny. I notice it now more because I have kids that have cell phones. And so I'll be having a conversation with my soon-to-be high schooler, and he's on his phone, and I'm just like, okay, you got to put that thing down. And as soon as I say it, I'm like, oh, that's how soul feels. And so it's like the tables have turned,
Yes,
and now I feel it.
Yes.
In a deeper way. All right, our final question. What are healthy boundaries regarding friendships with ex-partners? And how do you manage a partner who maintains ties with an ex? I don't think the person that asked this question is going to they're going to love the answer. I don't think the person they're married to is going to love the answer.
So, I don't know if there is a relationship with an ex.
Yeah.
I get it. You can have friends. But if they're not, especially if they're opposite sex, if they're not a friend of us, they're not a friend of you. And you have to put those guards up, right? You have to protect your relationship.
Yeah.
Even before marriage, that protection needs to be in place.
Yeah.
So I'm not friends with ex-boyfriends on Facebook or anything like that. I don't have phone numbers of ex-boyfriends. I try to honor my marriage by not exposing it to potential concerns or threats. Not that I'm looking for somebody else, but it's also very important for me to be aware that I could possibly open myself up to something that is just not what God wants for our relationship. And I think it's, my husband would probably say the same thing. You know, he runs into people, you know, we might run into someone, but we're not about to have a conversation. Right. And if he needs to have a conversation, he gets my buy-in first, right? Like, okay, someone wants to talk to me. This person wants to talk to me about this. How do you feel about that? Yeah. Do you want to be there? You know, it's like, okay. You know, most of the time I don't want to be there, but it's like but I'm aware of what the conversation is, when the conversation's taking place, how long the conversation's going to last, and what the conversation's about. Because that's one of those situations that we're not going to keep that confidence, right? No, I'm sharing this with my wife.
Exactly. That's when it is a secret.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think that there's a lot of layers to the response to this question. I think that the social media side of things included is like, look, don't even like unfollow, unfriend, block, do whatever you have to do. Like, it's too easy because you had a vulnerability with that person at one time. And so if you start having issues in your marriage, it's going to be really easy for that person to all of a sudden become really attractive again.
Absolutely.
And it is that whole thing of, man, maybe I married the wrong person and I should. And when that ex is still part of the life, like it complicates things. So like I would say even on the social media level, like no, unfriend, block, don't follow, all those things. And if your spouse is liking photos on Instagram of an ex, like you need to have that hard conversation.
Yeah.
And honestly, for me, it's a giant red flag if your spouse says, "Oh, it's no big deal." No, it's a big deal, and it's a big deal because I said it's a big deal. And the moment I said it's a big deal, you should have said, "You're right. I'm so sorry."
Yeah.
And so the complication or the other layer of this is when you're dealing with an ex who's the mother or the father of your child. And so like there is some connection that has to be maintained.
Yes.
For the sake of the child. And so we'll use that as like the scenario, because I would say outside of that scenario, you don't have a relationship with an ex. It just shouldn't happen. I don't care how good of a friend they are or were. There is no friendship that is more important than the friendship between you and your spouse.
Absolutely.
And so anything that can jeopardize that, get rid of it.
Yeah.
So in the unique case of y'all have a kid together
And you're co-parenting.
And you're trying to navigate that, what kind of boundaries would you recommend somebody have?
So this is actually something that we get asked a lot when it comes down to blended families sometimes, as well as relationships outside of the marriage before. So the first thing I would say is that you are now a parenting duo, right? So you're connected with somebody else. And it's important to have that united front. The same way you would have it with the kids, you need to have it with this other person. They need to respect the fact that you are now one with someone else. And if you are communicating that, this is the responsibility of the spouse that is connected to that person, not the responsibility of the person that they're with now, right? So if my husband's ex-wife and him had a child, my job is not to connect with her about the condition of our relationship. Right. It is his, about how we're going to deal with the kids. And it's important to bring that spouse in as a way of being a support for the family, because you are a family. You're all connected at this point. I think this is one of those things that honestly is rare, but Hollywood actually kind of gets it kind of okay.
Okay.
Because they
that's
have
a unique moment.
I know, because these Hollywood families, they can navigate this system, at least from our viewpoint, pretty well, where you can have the ex-wife, the current wife, and all the kids together at Thanksgiving, and we got a picture and a spread, for People Magazine or whatever. I'm not saying that we're going to ever want to get to that point, but for the kids' sake, you need to have harmony. There needs to still be the respect that this is mom, this is dad, this is stepmom, stepdad. You
each of those roles are different.
Yes.
And you need to acknowledge the difference and respect the differences.
Exactly. Yes. Because just the same way kids will split a parent, they will split that group like nothing else. And they will cause division and stress. And you don't want that. And then if your ex is causing drama, then you need to squash it. And communication with that ex really needs to be a multiple people conversation. I've heard of couples that have group chats with the ex, and even if the ex is married, it's 4 people in that group chat, because we are parenting now.
I'm a big fan of group chats, especially when it's opposite sex. Just keep anything from even feeling weird. My wife gets CC'd on so many random emails that she has nothing to do with. Just because I'm like, I just feel weird that being a private conversation. It shouldn't be a private conversation.
Absolutely. So
this is good advice. And I think, if we could sum up this entire conversation, it is have a conversation.
Pretty much.
Like, just communicate.
Have a conversation. Go to Entwine.
Yeah, there you go.
Seek marriage counseling if you need it.
And honestly, even if you don't really need it, it's probably... And maybe it wouldn't necessarily be marriage counseling, but maybe a marriage life group or a marriage event or retreat or something where there's going to be little elements of that marriage counseling, but it's also going to be, disguised in activity and fun. Like,
we have to invest in our marriage. I'm all for conferences, reading books together, watching YouTube videos together even, but doing something to invest, whether it's a devotional. We're really bad at devotionals. We got one.
Soul and I are too. So,
oh my God.
So as a pastor, and I felt confidence in this. I was in this pastor training thing with Larry Stockstill, who's like one of the giants of the faith alive, and he was talking about how he and his wife don't do devotionals together. Because his way of thinking and her way of thinking are so drastically different that they would never enjoy that moment. And so instead what they do is he does his Devo, she does her Devo, and then they pray together.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I don't feel
That's
so
the
bad
way to do
anymore.
it.
I was like,
Yeah.
if Larry can make it work, I can make it work. Let's do this.
We've tried. We have one we got for our wedding, and it's perfect. It's pristine because we've never used it. It's beautiful. And then we got one last year. We went to a family life conference, and I was like, are we going to really use this? And he's like, yeah, we could try it. And they had like date night ideas in there.
It sounds like Soul's all the time. She's like, we should do this. And I'm like, it's not happening.
And I was like, are you sure? Because I don't want to buy it if we're not going to do it. It's been sitting on our shelf the whole time. Yeah. It's just not something that we are necessarily drawn to. Yeah. But being intentional, trying to pray together, which sometimes with our life schedule, it kind of gets, you have to find that perfect time. Yeah. But trying to connect, in whatever way you can, and keeping God definitely in the center, because there is no healthy marriage without him. Yeah. Sorry.
Something that ended up working really well for my family was actually to do it as a family. So we've had greater success with family devos than we've had with like couples devos.
Yeah.
And so we just do SOAP, which is what we always teach here is scripture, observation, application, prayer. And so we actually did it during the 10-day fast. We sat down with our kids at the dinner table because we were fasting. So so we sat down at the dinner table, opened up the Bible, and we read an entire chapter together. And then each kid had to give their observation, their application, and then we prayed together. And it worked great. Yeah. For that connection, that bond with our kids, with my wife and I, and then it gave us things to talk about and pray about throughout the day. So I see the merit of it. Yeah. Just sometimes that kind of connection, it is hard because the way I study the Bible, the way Soul studies the Bible is different.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But keep God in the middle of the relationship.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like it. Quiana, thank you so much for hanging out. I know this is a very crazy day for you, and so for you to still be here, we just appreciate it greatly.
Thank you.
And for anybody that is needing to talk, counseling is available for our members, members of CLC. And if you're not a member and you contact Quiana, she's not going to be like, ignore. You're just going to give some resources for them to follow. So you've got a plethora of information to redirect people to the places where they can get help. Yes. So counseling at clc.tv.
That's it.
And we're going to help some people and have some healthier marriages.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you for hanging out for this. I think this is officially the longest episode of Between Sermons ever. So good job, Quiana. But we are going to be back next week talking about all things singlehood, singleness, and especially talking about what it's like for singles that are wanting to become married. So that's going to be specifically for you next week, but it's going to be a great conversation. Hope to see you there, and God bless.